Well, welcome to the Quantum Yoga Podcast. I'm the host, Jonathan Rickert, and we're very fortunate today to have Dr. Beverly Rubik. And Dr. Rubik received her PhD in biophysics in 1979 from the University of California at Berkeley. And her scientific interests include consciousness studies, bioelectromagnetics, water in regard to the living state, and alternative and complementary medicine. She's especially known for her pioneering research on the biofield, which we're going to ask her a lot about in a little bit here, and the energy field that's associated with living organisms. And she's conducted exploratory research on Qigong masters and Reiki practitioners, remotely affecting physical and biological systems. She's measured the extremely low-level light, otherwise known as biophotons, the emissions of living organisms in relation to health and various states of consciousness, has conducted studies in the effects on low-level electromagnetic fields on water and biological systems, and discovered an effect of cell phone radiation on human blood. She's won several awards for research, including the Alce and Elmer Green Award in 2009 by the International Society for a Study of Subtle Energies in Energetic Medicine. The list goes on. I'd like to just jump right in and ask you stuff right away. And I think the first thing that I'd like to ask you about is, what is the biofield? And if you can explain that to our listeners who may not have heard the term.
The biofield is the human energy field. Well, actually, it's the field of energy around any living organism. But in the case of humans, it has an anatomy. It consists of the acupuncture meridians, which are largely flowing up and down the body, and acupoints, which are special portals, also very high electrical conductivity points on the skin. And it consists of radiant energy that we emit. We emit a lot of energy in the infrared. That's how doctors do thermography. But we also emit other frequencies, extremely low-level visible light, which I've been looking at. Then we have the energy centers, sometimes called chakras, 7 of them, from the crown to the third eye to the throat, heart, solar plexus, etc. And these are from Ayurvedic medicine, the ideas of energy centers that are associated with certain functions and organs. And then there are the 3 dantians in traditional Chinese medicine, located in the center of the head, in the center of the chest, near the heart, and then the lower abdomen, also corresponding to the hara. And these are very important energy centers from an Oriental perspective. So these are the anatomical aspects of the biofield. It's not all inside the body, it's also outside and around the body. And I believe, and some others do believe, that the biofield is not junk energy. There are certain aspects of it, for example, brain waves and heart waves, that are well known in conventional medicine. People measure your brain waves and your heart waves, looking at heart and brain function. But there's a lot more that conventional medicine and conventional science has not regarded. And I believe that these underlying energy fields are actually orchestrating and regulating our organisms, that they're regulating the biochemistry and the physiology of our organisms. And that's what's new that has been added. I mean, there's got to be something tying together the integral whole of life. It isn't DNA. DNA is just some molecule. And as I've often said, when you die, absolutely nothing happens to your DNA. It stays intact. They may find it a million years later and maybe even try to clone you, or at least some version of you. But what happens to you when you die is that your energy, your biofield, is gone. And so to me, it's a deeper indication of life, the life force, the vital energy. These were parts of indigenous philosophy and medicine for millennia. And unfortunately, modern science threw it out until relatively recently, when a bunch of us sat around at National Institutes of Health back about 20 years ago. We said, we need a concept for this to explain energy medicine and many alternative types of medicine. And we don't want to rely on an indigenous term from the past, because it's loaded. There are issues with that. So we invented the word biofield. That was 1992. And then we worked very hard to get it to become a medical search term at the National Library of Medicine. And that was before uh, Google search engine and Google Scholar and all of these modern ways of finding information. That was a very important step, having it accepted at the National Library of Medicine. So that's, in a nutshell, what the biofield is and how important it is.
What are the things that we can measure contained in the biofield, or can we?
That's a very good question. And I've long advocated that we need a human energy project, a project to map the biofield. We had a project some decades ago called the Human Genome Project, which mapped the genome, the DNA, genes, etc. And unfortunately, it led to a very unsatisfying result that we have less genes than a grain of rice. So there's got to be something more to being human. Um, well, there are some measures of the biofield, but this whole field is in its infancy because there has not been a concerted effort. There's never been a leadership organization in the world that says, let's pull together many key scientists and scholars and map this thing, as there was for the Human Genome Project. That happened because there were billions of dollars given out to scientists all over the world. We only have a handful of scientists today looking at the biofield and trying to measure it. One of the ways is to take a look at the flow of electricity and the acupuncture meridians. And there are devices out there to do this. There's a device called electroacupuncture according to Voll, or EAV. There are meridian stress testing devices that are actually used in complementary and alternative medicine that assess the energy flow in meridians looking at the electricity. And one can also take a look at the electrical conductivity of specific acupuncture points to get an idea, is this person's energy flowing well, or are there blocks, or is there too much energy going on there? So that's another thing. And I use that at my lab. Another measure would be counting the biophotons from the dantians, from the hand, from various points on the body, looking at the low-level light emitted from the human body. So biophoton emission measurement is another one. And of course there's thermography, which is even used in conventional medicine. And that's really looking at the infrared. Where is there heat in the body? One can look at inflammation and even, for example, thermography of the breast to look for potential cancer tumors very non-invasively, because it's simply looking at the energy of the breast, not applying any x-rays or any energy. And thermography is used routinely to look for inflammation in medical imaging, for example, in sports medicine. So, and then there's the Biowell camera, which is based on a corona discharge effect, very much like the old Kirlian photography that was invented back in 1948 in Russia. But now we use a digital version of it with far less voltage than was used back then. So we're not interfering with the human energy field, but rather applying a low level of a moderate voltage to the fingers and other parts of the body, for example, and looking for induced light emission, patterns of the corona discharge, which is a well-known effect in physics. When you charge something electrically, it will, as it relaxes, emit light. So everything really has a corona discharge, but there's a special quality and sparkiness to living things when looked at by this technique. And so the Biowell is a commercial instrument for assessing the biofield that's very, very successful. In the biophoton emission, we put a person in a dark closet or we put their hand in a dark box. And we're not adding any electrical field. It's simply looking at them the way they are, nothing added. But with Biowell, we're inducing a light emission with some 5,000 volts when fingertips are touching an electrified lens. And then we have a CCD, a charge coupled detector, that's measuring the light emission. And it's much larger, actually. The light emission from Biowell, the induced light, is much, much higher than biophoton emission. Just to give you an idea, the biophoton emission from the hand, which is one of the largest emitters of the body, is something on the order of 40 photons per second per square centimeter. Now, you need very, very specialized tool to count photons, whereas the Biowell is looking at a pattern of light emission. It's like the CCD in a camera, in an ordinary digital camera.
Got it. So we're talking about, again, just to bring it back to the question of the types of energy that we can measure that are part of this biofield are primarily biophotons and electromagnetic frequencies.
Well, I also think that there's more. In my laboratory, we've been exploring energies that go beyond conventional electromagnetics and conventional electricity, conventional magnetism. We have developed several detectors for what has been called subtle energy, energy that is different than that which has already been explored by conventional science. And there's been a lot of conversation about this over many hundreds of years, really. Is there a unique energy emitted by living things compared to the world at large? And we think there is. And this might be some of the aspects of qi, as it's called in Chinese medicine, or prana, as it's called in ancient Indian medicine, something more subtle. And what we find, we've developed these detectors, and we find when people are in high states of emotional, let's say positive emotions, joy, love, gratitude, plus focus, we find these detectors are sensing something. And our detectors are completely isolated from any conventional energy detection because they have Faraday cages around them and mu metal, and they're optically and thermally shielded. So there's no chance that conventional energy is setting them off. So we think that there's something more, and it's linked to passion with focus.
This is kind of where I see heart rate variability connecting to emotion, right? Because you would, HeartMath, for example, they've popularized the idea of coherence and utilizing elevated emotion with a specific breathing rate to change this. Are you using HRV to measure any of these effects of intention and focus?
Certainly. I've also used HRV. And I understand the coherence principle of HeartMath, although I have to say that it's not been completely defined in terms of their algorithm for calculating that coherence has been kept proprietary. So we don't know exactly what they are doing, but I use other types of HRV that are scientifically and medically recognized in my research in particular.
Let's circle back to the Biowell. Since I am using this device, I got it from you, and it has been such an incredible. There is so much to it, and I wonder if you can give the listeners a little more background on the depth of research that went into this and your early connections to bring it to the States.
Sure. I've been interested in the energy fields since I was a teenager, actually. So I've always been on the outlook for what are those devices out there that might be novel. And I found out about Dr. Konstantin Korotkov exploring this with a digital form of what appeared to be Kirlian photography, and asked him to come to the United States and give a seminar. And that was 20 years ago. It was about 1997. So he gave his first workshop in San Francisco at my invitation, but it was on a precursor device called gas discharge visualization camera. And it really operates on the same principle, but in those years it was a big, clunky device because it was not made with integrated circuits as the modern Biowell is. So it was a large device. It plugged into the wall. You had to be near an electrical outlet to run it, and it hooked up to a computer much in the same way, and it gave the same patterns of light around the finger and a software analysis. But over the years, there's been a lot of refinement, not only of the hardware with integrated circuits and making it compact, but now it operates off the USB port of a computer. So you can take Biowell into the field as long as your notebook computer is charged, then you can operate it off the USB port and you can measure people anywhere, or you can with accessories measure the energy of an area, of a group. You can also assess the energy of water with the water sensor. So there's been a lot of refinement of the hardware and the software over the last 20 years. And it's really great to see this wonderful portable, user-friendly version that's emerged.
What are some of the uses that you have for it in your laboratory?
Well, I often study subtle energy devices or energy healing devices that clients of mine are interested in getting an assessment of their own device. How is their device affecting people? They want to know this, and they want a third-party laboratory such as mine to do it so that it has more credibility than if they do it themselves. So I bring in their device, and sometimes I have also what's called a sham device. It looks like the same device, but it doesn't work, or sometimes we just turn the actual device off. And we don't tell the subjects in the experiments whether it's on or off. So we render them blind. And sometimes I am also blind as to which is the sham and which is the real device, making it double blind. And so I measure these people, usually before and after the intervention with this device of the client, which is a device designed to interact with the human energy field, probably to make it look better, because that's where most healing devices work in energy medicine. And then we're taking a look to see, does it change the human energy field? And if so, in what direction? And exactly how does it change it? So we're looking pre-post the intervention to assess how the biofield changes. And that's important because if the biofield improves as a result of an intervention, and if it holds that new pattern, then self-healing will take place. In other words, the biofield is an early stage of healing. And if you can get the biofield to shift, then the flesh and blood will follow. And this comes out of old Chinese philosophy. Where the mind goes, the qi flows, and the blood follows. So ideally, you would shift your mind, which would change you energetically, which would then heal you, heal the flesh and the blood. But most of us don't have the wherewithal to hold our minds in a new way because our minds are vacillating. So therefore, we need a little help from energy medicine devices or subtle energy products to help guide the biofield into a better pattern, and then self-healing can take place. So that's one main way I look at the biofield. I also look at it in research. We're curious to see what happens, for example, during energy healing. And we have seen energy healers emit a tremendous amount of energy around the fingertips when they're in the energy emission state compared to their resting state. So there's something very revealing about Biowell when it comes to energy coming from the human hands in energy healing such as Reiki, therapeutic touch, quantum touch, all of these different types of modalities.
The accessory that you presented a short segment at the conference a couple weeks ago, the SEC conference, which was a great fun conference. Got to see you do that. And this is called a Sputnik. Introduce the listeners to the Sputnik.
Well, the Sputnik, of course, the name comes from the very first Russian spacecraft. It went up in 1959. I remember it well. I was a little girl. And it's shaped like the Sputnik. It's a round ball with spikes all over it, evenly spaced. And it's hooked up to the Biowell. And it's actually an antenna for subtle energy in the style of Nikola Tesla, so that it senses energy of the environment. And you put this thing on and you follow its energy emission over time. There actually are several plots that you can make, energy, intensity, etc. And then you demark various intervals. For example, you usually start with a baseline in which nothing is happening. You just want to see what's the ambient energy of this room at this time. And then you engage participants in a different activity or It might be a very inward activity, such as prayer or meditation. At SEC, Sports, Energy, and Consciousness event, we did a series of energetic exercises designed to actually help with inward energy, um, such as listening to sound, Tibetan bell, and music, and then performing the Donna Eden energy exercises, which are grounding and centering, and then doing tapping or um, emotional freedom technique, which is basically enlivening the various acupuncture points, sometimes done along with affirmations of health and wellness. And so we went through a series of exercises, and I demarked these various intervals. And then later we looked to see, well, what changed? And actually, energy slowly went down for the group during that time. And in retrospect, and thinking about this, we were doing exercises that were grounding and centering inside ourselves. And I had expected that maybe some of the coaches would get up and do some rah, rah, rah energy, like getting team spirit going. But we didn't do that. Had we done that, we would have seen energy go up. And maybe next year we'll do that. So, but that's the sort of thing I've seen. For example, once with Dr. Karatkov, those of us who are distributors of Biowell, we all sat around and he told what was a very off-color joke. And we had the Sputnik going and it went downhill. You know, none of us liked this joke. It was very off-color. And then he told a psycho-spiritually uplifting story. And we watched the energy recover and then surpass the baseline energy. So that's the kind of example of how the energy of a group can change depending upon what's occurring with the group energy, what's going on for them that is either uplifting or centering and sinking in, or engaging them in some kind of group rah-rah excitement. And so it can be assessed, and it's very exciting. And you can do statistical analyses at the touch of a mouse. It's all very easy.
Discuss, if you can, the type of energy that it's measuring and what aspect of the biofield is interacting with the Sputnik.
Well, that's a tough question to answer because I've asked this question to Dr. Karatko, inventor, but I think it's related to exuberance, a group sense of solidarity, and but also I've taken it to sacred sites in which there's not a lot of people there. It's me and the site, and I have seen changes even approaching the sacred site and running Biowell. So there we have, well, there's a history there, a rich history of something happening. Maybe it was primitive man in stone circles doing something, even though no one is present at the time. Something about the space is sacred and holds energy. So it's not entirely clear to me exactly what Sputnik can measure, but it can measure special energy spots on Earth. It can measure a shift in, I would say, a group response, whether it's an individual thing inward and then it tends to settle in, or whether the group is interacting and having a good time and getting exuberant and then it tends to rise. So there's several aspects to Sputnik, and again, because it's based on Tesla technology, it's not entirely transparent what it is that Nikola Tesla fully did. We don't really understand his technology yet, and it was discredited in its time by the people who funded him, and we should go a little bit into that perhaps, because he wanted to give the world free energy. So Tesla's investors were disturbed that he wanted to give the world free energy because they wanted a return on their investment. And, you know, with giving free energy, there would be no return. So anyway, Tesla was discredited historically, although I know that he had something special. So at this time, I have to say that no one that I know of fully understands what it is Tesla did or exactly what his antennas, such as Sputnik, are picking up. But it is important, and it seems special, and it relates to something subtle. And I actually think there are many types of subtle energy. I don't think it's just about one type. So the Tesla antennas are picking up something. It might be more than one type of subtle energy. But clearly, the sacred site type is different from a group of people in the present. And so it seems to be picking up more than one type of subtle energy.
Wow. Okay, let's segue into talking about water. Biowell has an accessory. Speak, if you can, a little bit about that and some of this incredible water research that you've done.
Okay, well, it's very nice to take a look at how water can be charged. You know, lots of people talk about putting their hands around water and sending it love or energy, and this, of course, follows the work of Emoto, the late Emoto, the Japanese researcher who was doing this with sending love and hate to water and looking at the difference in crystallization into ice. Well, we don't have to wait for crystals to form. We can see right away with the water sensor how the water has been changed. And so basically the water sensor is an electrode, and you just put it into a beaker or a glass of water. And you can run a baseline and then send energy. And you can watch the energy charging the water and when it levels off. So it's a very quick and easy measure of noting your own effect of energizing water. Now, I've done a lot of studies on water also with the old gas discharge visualization camera, which had a different device, a different accessory called the materials testing kit. And with that, we were able to suspend a drop of water hanging from a syringe right over the lens of the GDV camera. And we could then run the camera and see how the droplet of water was energized. And so this was a different test for water that led to a quantitative result that we could compare many waters. And I did studies like this both for clients and comparing drinking waters for my own gratification, and found that water coming from an ionizer, which is a device that filters water and then electrifies it, rich in electrons. It's a home commercial device that you can get, ionizers. It's a very healthy water because it is rich in electrons and is very similar to water flowing on Earth, because the water coming out of the faucet, tap water, which most of us drink, is not very healthy, and it has lost its charge. In fact, it's quite dead compared to water flowing on Earth, which is rich in minerals and picking up the charge of the Earth, because the Earth is rich in electrons. And so it's far healthier to drink energized water coming from an ionizer than it is to drink tap water. And so there's different ways of making this sort of charged water, and one can compare one method versus another. Other things that I've explored in water research are something called the exclusion zone. That water, droplets of water placed near a charged membrane, and this done under a microscope, forms a very special layer that tends to exclude everything, colloids, solutes. So there's something special about water near membranes. And this has a lot of ramifications because the water inside our bodies is pretty much everywhere near cell membranes. And therefore, the water inside our bodies is structured very differently from bulk water. And that's an important consideration in terms of what should we drink and whether we're getting hydrated from it and what's it doing to this interfacial water.
As I understand it, this exclusion zone can be created with certain frequencies of light. Is that correct?
Well, the exclusion zone can grow when light is imposed on water with an interface. But first you need this interface, a charged membrane, a substance called naphion, which actually is a commercial substance that you can buy. You hydrate it, you put a strip of it in water, and then you add water. Let's say this is under a microscope slide. So if you microscope slide a piece of naphion, you add water and then a cover slip, and you observe this under the microscope. And you add little colloidal particles that will tell you where the interface stops. And when you shine light on it, the colloidal particles will move away from the interface, and the exclusion zone will get larger. And when you take away that light, the exclusion zone gets smaller. So water is relating or reacting to visible light, which is rather surprising because water is clear. Water should not absorb visible light. It's completely transparent to it. That's why a glass of water looks clear. But somehow it's energized by this light and reacts accordingly. And the same is true of the water-air interface.
The easy in our body, can you talk a little bit about how that is created, how that is fundamentally different than bulk water? What you're saying, bulk water is water before it enters our body, water we would want to drink.
Well, the idea in our vessel, in our blood vessels and in our cells is that the structure of water near the membranes or near the vein or artery up to, say, a millimeter is very different structurally than at a distance. So that means because cells are very tiny, virtually all the water in our cells is in this exclusion zone special state. Or it's more gelled. It's the reason our cells may be actually more gel-like. So the water rushing in our arteries, which are larger, of course, would not be consisting entirely of exclusion zone water, but some bulk water. But by and large, the living state is comprised of a special structured water that is not the same as bulk water. By bulk water, I mean like this, water in a glass or tube. The water is probably the most complicated substance that we know of. In fact, I believe from looking at other water research, there are not just several or four states of matter of water, as Gerald Pollack says, but I think there are infinitely more subtle states of water that have yet to be elucidated. But looking at Raman spectroscopy, for example, is one way to look at the subtle structures of water. And water is said to hold information. I think it holds a lot of bioinformation within our cells, for example, and that there's a spectrum of structured waters. There's not just one type. And you see on the market a lot of people selling structured water. But the problem with that is if you expect the water in a bottle like this to be structured, well, think again, because this bottle of water has been traveling around in a truck, maybe heated up in the truck as it's going to get delivered somewhere. So it may have lost its special structuring because the memory of water is just so long. And then other influences come into play and change the structure on that water. So it's very difficult to bottle structured water. It's sort of like trying to put life in a bottle and screw the lid on and saying, here you go, here's a living butterfly. Well, it doesn't last very long, does it? Runs out of oxygen, dies. So the same is true of water. It's the essence of life, and there may be special structures that are better than some, but it doesn't hold that charge as long as you might expect. And then it takes on information from the ambient environment and has been changed. I had a student who brought me specially charged water from his guru in India. Of course, he took an airplane from India to San Francisco to get here. And I said, well, what do you think happened to that water? You were exposed to tremendous energy fields from the engines of the airplane. So whatever your guru did in India, unfortunately, we didn't see anything because the water has been changed. More recently, it saw energy pollution from airplane engines and other things, transportation vehicles as you got here. And so it's different. Had we been in India, we might have done that experiment together. But unfortunately, that kind of holy water doesn't retain its charge.
What you're saying is if you have a choice, if you don't have a fresh spring that you can drink from all the time, the second best option would be to get something like an ionizer that you can dispense in real time, drink in real time, and it's not sitting around and being stored.
Yes. You need, whatever you want to do to energize your water, you should energize it and consume it. It should not be something traveling around or sitting in a bottle. It's like carrot juice or fine wine. Once you open that bottle, that carrot juice isn't the same as freshly squeezed. This is because we're talking about water with an energy in it, and that energy shifts over time. and so does the information coming into the water, because water is very impressionable and will take on energy and information from its immediate environment. So that's why it's important to get it at the source or energize and immediately consume it.
So would like to dig just a little bit deeper into what you mean by energized. And people may be familiar with like alkaline water. Can you just briefly talk about that? But moreover, this concept of ORP, or oxidation reduction potential, which seems like is a more important component of water.
That's right. I mean, if you want alkaline water, then just add a little bit of baking soda to water. It will be alkaline. But that's not where it's at. What you need to do is change the oxidative reductive potential from its positive value coming out of the tap. It might be plus 150 millivolts. That's what it is at my lab. And then you need to make it negative, because natural spring water flowing on Earth, not bottled, natural spring water flowing on Earth would have an oxidative reductive potential of about minus 250 millivolts. And that is rich in energy. It's rich in electrons. That is a natural antioxidant. And the idea of taking an antioxidant that permeates your entire body quickly is a powerful antioxidant and will relieve you of oxidative stress, for example, which is one of the indicators underlying all chronic degenerative diseases, from diabetes to cancer to heart disease, stroke, etc. Oxidative stress. And by alleviating it, you are preventing, or you're helping prevent, chronic disease. And you're also energizing the body with this electron cascade, because minus 250 millivolts means that it's rich in electrons and will help the whole biofield. It will help the flow of energy throughout the body.
That is so fascinating. I am reading Dr. Jerry Tennant's book right now. I'm not familiar with this doctor,
yes.
But the fundamental premise for him is that you need to have voltage as a precursor to basically everything else, biochemically, physiologically, and that the adult cell is meant to run at around minus 25 millivolts. So if that is true, minus 250 millivolts is a huge net gain of electrons, and plus 150 millivolts is a massive drain on. It's incredible.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. Exactly what you say. That, we're isolated from the Earth. The Earth is one big source of electrons, but most of us are wearing shoes most of the time. Most of us are sleeping far from the ground. Now, there is this whole concept called earthing, which can also help. By earthing your bed sheets to the living earth, you can at least get some of this negative voltage up there. By wearing special shoes that have that are not so insulating from Earth, there's ways of conducting wires from the bottom of the shoe to your kidney 1 point, which is a key energy point on the foot, bottom of the foot. You can, again, get some of that rich electrons from our Mother Earth. But most of us are not aware of this, and then we're around all kinds of static electricity from polymer fibers and from our computer screens, etc. So we're electrically deprived of electrons. And so drinking water is one key way to improve our relationship to Earth, to get back to nature, because we've been living so wrongly. And it was really only in the last few decades when this was discovered. But where people drink the water that's enriched with electrons at minus 250 millivolts, the water from ionizers, their blood looks so much better. I look at blood and do something called live blood analysis under the microscope. And I can tell you without a doubt that blood that is deprived of this kind of water is often, the cells are sticky, they're piling up in strings that we call rouleaux, which means rolls. And circulation is impaired. Blood circulation is impaired to the tiniest capillaries all over the body. which means the brain and all of the organs have impaired circulation. Now, what do you think that does to people? First, it deprives them of oxygen, it deprives them of nutrients, and it deprives them of waste removal. So they feel fatigued, sluggish, and they'll go for sugar, and then they get fat. I mean, this is one of the problems of our times. I think it's one of the stories behind obesity. Of course, there are many factors, but this is one main one, that people are reaching for a sugary snack because they're fatigued, when it's because peripheral circulation is impaired.
That is an amazing way to connect the dots. And there are other sort of offensive energies, if you will, that are showing this same type of effect on the blood, right? I mean, you could, for example, certain types of electromagnetic frequencies will do this, especially in the microwave range.
Exactly, and I did a study on that, and it's on my website, looking at the effects of cell phone radiation, which are microwaves, on 12 people in a study ranging in age from the 20s to the 70s. Yes, the blood does get sticky. That's phase 1. In phase 2, with a little longer exposure, the blood cells got spiky, which is not a good sign. That too will impair peripheral circulation, because blood cells actually have to change their shape. They have to hunker down to get through the tiniest capillaries. When they get large, balled up, and spiky, then they can't fit through those capillaries either. So I suspect that exposure to cell phone radiation, which I did in my study, was just 45 minutes, but people are often using these things for hours and holding it near their head quite a long time. And it's not recommended. We have to consider that these are active emitters, and to not use them, to rely on wired devices whenever possible. And this infatuation with Wi-Fi is a big stressor on our lives and will lead to more electrohypersensitivity. And it's also been identified as a low-level carcinogen by the World Health Organization. And so we don't know where we're going with this. The smartphone has been around for 10 years, but, well, cancers take time to develop. And now we have 7 billion cell phones on this planet of about 8 billion people. You can see how large-scale the problem really is. And no clear sense of the future. I know that greater bandwidth is coming with the next generation of cell phone, and I'm concerned because people do not relate to these devices as active emitters. They relate to it like something inert, which it is not.
That's a really good point. And it's a little bit like the Wild West right now. There are just so many things coming online. There's this exponential increase in this microwave range, especially because it's not only a cell phone, it's anything that is communicating wirelessly.
Right.
And I think this is just needs to be in people's consciousness that there is, like you said, there are active emitters, and that includes things like Bluetooth, and that includes every device that emits that signal. And these are cumulative in nature, and proximity does matter.
Exactly. The so-called Internet of Things. There are many things that are going to be emitting, including all of your electrical appliances. And they're all going to talk to each other, including your smart meter if you have one, which I don't recommend, because these are digital emitters, and they emit large pulses of microwaves. It's nothing that a living organism can ever adapt to. It's not a low-level continuous radiation. It's always these large spikes, which are completely jarring to our biofield and to our physiology. And so we need to pay attention more and advocate using wired devices whenever possible, particularly in schools. Some of us were starting to measure the dosages that young students were getting in the classroom, because very often these children carry a cell phone to school, they have a tablet, there's industrial strength Wi-Fi all around in the school, and they wonder why they have learning difficulties and headaches. Well, we went in there and measured some of these levels, and they were above and beyond the recommended levels by the Environmental Protection Agency. And so, again, when you add more of these things to our environment, we're over the limit. And yet, most people don't realize it because it's not like something you can smell or taste, like smoke. And I'm thinking we had a tremendous campaign against tobacco smoke when I was younger. and we eliminated it. But smoking was, it was kind of an extra. You don't really need to smoke. You could chew a nicotine gum or something, but unfortunately, we really need these communication devices. This is the nature of our world. So what are we going to do about it? How are we going to make them safer? We're very challenged to do that before things get worse, in my view.
Yes. Where I would like to take this conversation is about the water that's in our cells, this exclusion zone that you were talking about, and its relationship to the light frequencies that grow that exclusion zone. Correct me if I'm wrong, but one of those frequencies is in the infrared A range.
Yes, that's true.
Which is the same frequency emitted by our mitochondria.
Yes, there we go. That's absolutely true. And we do emit a fair amount of infrared, and we're probably pumping up these exclusion zones at a very high level internally, because we can see that infrared in thermography out here, but it's also inside the body. So I think that the structured water is a very important part of our biology. And some people say, that water really is the essence of life, and the biomolecules just come along for a ride. And that's a radically different viewpoint than it was, say, 20 years ago, when everybody thought water was simply a passive solvent that held together the biomolecules of life that were the active players. That water is truly the essence of life, the mother of life, and that the biomolecules just come along for a ride. And I have to say I agree with that view.
So what we know is that in terms of, we'll call it biofield health right now, okay, is that you want as many electrons in your water as possible. An ionizer can do that. And regarding the information content of the water, because as you mentioned before, Dr. Emoto did these fantastic studies, and we can measure that stuff now. Is there an informational imprinting that will happen as well? Is that something to consider?
That's a good question. And when you use an ionizer, because it has a strong electric field, you are erasing the memory of water. And I think that's important, because our tap water came from a sewage treatment plant. And think about the information in that water. I also know that where I live, the water company reminds us not to flush our prescription drugs down the drain, because they can't get it all out anymore. Personally, I don't want the information of all those big pharmaceutical drugs in my body. I don't think that's healthy, and I don't need those drugs. I want to erase that memory. I want to filter those drugs out, and then I want to erase the memory. And an ionizer will do both, plus with a good filter, precursor filter on it. And then you're adding the electron-rich, the cathode treatment of the water at the end. So it's a no-brainer that we should be drinking this water. And there are so many studies that show that ionized water fed to, for example, mice from birth extends life 20 to 50%. And the offspring were just fine. They were a little higher in weight. That's a good thing. I mean, there's no dangerous aspects to this water. And I'm thinking about minus 150 to minus 250 millivolts. Earlier you said you want as many electrons as possible. Well, within limits. I wouldn't want water that gave me a shock when I drank it. There is water like that. I have touched water that has given me a shock. That's too much electricity in that water. So some people are playing with water and adding so much electron, too much. But an ionizer is a safe, logical amount, the same as the Earth would give you if you could drink a stream flowing on Earth, which, if you did, it might give you giardia, so you have to be careful to not get parasites drinking native streams because of what is out there in those streams these days.
What would you say are the top 3, 5 other inputs that are going to feed our biofield?
Well, I think it's important to eat fresh, organic foods. I am a hobby farmer. I grow a lot of things. I've got all kinds of fruit trees and vegetables and fruits now just coming out because it's summer and it's delicious. to pick your own vegetables and fruits, which have flavor. The problem is when you buy many of these things, even if they're organic, they no longer have flavor. Something is missing. There's micronutrients missing from even the so-called organic farmed products. The problem is the farms became large. And when farms are done at a large scale, they can't do it well. And the soils get depleted. And that's where we are. We're not getting appropriate micronutrients. And then people say, well, let me take supplements. But the problem with that is you're not getting the natural combinations of things, and you're getting often things made abroad that aren't regulated very well, and things made in the laboratory. Even vitamins are laboratory produced, and then you're not getting just the D or L form, as it's called, the right-handed or left-handed form. You're getting mixtures that your liver doesn't know what to deal with. So it's far better to get things from food, and it's far better to get things from local small farms or to grow your own, and to have fresh fruit that's in season. And I think it's important if you're eating meat to get animals that are pasture raised and not just fed corn and soy in some shelter. Again, it's completely unnatural and stressful on those animals, and we inherit that stress. So get enough sleep, and make sure that you don't look at your bright screen before you go to bed, because your quality of sleep will be severely impaired from the bright bluish light of your screen. There are screen software that you can get to make your screen yellower and yellower as after the sun goes down, so that when you go to bed you won't be so jarred awake from a bluish screen. In fact, I think you should probably turn off your screen about 2 hours before bedtime to get proper rest and the right brain waves that are indeed restful, the right delta, theta, dream cycles, etc. So fresh, organic, locally grown foods in season, very deep, restful sleep, enough hours, at least 7 or 8, drinking that good water. And I think also, where is your mind? Are you thinking healthy thoughts, or are you preoccupied with stressful thoughts? Because where the mind goes, the energy flows. And so that's an important regulator of your energy field, to work with your mind, to think positive thoughts about your health and about the world. And yes, there's a lot of nastiness going on out there, but what can you do to make a difference? We should be doing our best to serve one another and not just serving ourselves. We could build heaven on earth if we always thought about the other instead of ourselves.
A slightly different topic here. An interesting study you did on pyramids, and I've been fascinated by this topic recently. And can you give us a summation of your findings?
The pyramid, and we were working with wooden structures just 2 inches, very hollowed out. In fact, I sleep under a pyramid. It promotes restful sleep, but it also energized young seedlings and led to more biomass in an experiment that we did. And you can't argue with that. The weight of the plants was, I don't remember all the figures now, but on the order of 17, 18% more biomass than without a pyramid. And that it seems synergistic with energy healers who would send energy also to the plants under the pyramid. There was even more biomass, something on the order of 35% more biomass with healer energy plus pyramid treatment. So it seems to interact with subtle energy. It seems to be sort of a subtle energy lens or collector if you work under a pyramid.
This concept of sleeping under the pyramid is something I'm starting to explore right now. Do you think that it matters the material of the pyramid? As I've heard of some people, a lot of people will use copper struts, right, for the pyramid, and then maybe some sort of a specialized capstone that has various metals or even different gems in it. Do you have any opinion about that?
Well, I haven't explored that. I've only used wooden pyramids. I really can't say. I think it would be worthwhile exploring it. There's certainly, I'm aware of research on copper pyramids that are also yielded positive results. And even cardboard pyramids. I mean, the original cardboard box for razor blades that was done in Czechoslovakia, when was it, in the 1950s, as a blade sharpener, was just some cardboard box. So I think one can explore different materials and see what happens.
Dr. Rubik, any current research, future research that you can share with us?
Well, we've been writing up some of the results from our so-called sensor suite. We have this remarkable piece of equipment that my colleague Harry Jabs developed, which consists of about 12 sensors, environmental sensors, physiological sensors of a human subject, and subtle energy sensors. And we run this thing 24/7 and look for changes in energy, especially when human subjects are present. What is going on with what's present in the room, whether they're sending energy or in an ecstatic state or meditative state, etc. So we'll be publishing some of that in the proceedings of the International Academy of Consciousness meeting proceedings. They had a meeting in Miami in May, which was very, very lucrative, and they'll put out a special issue of the Journal of Consciousness, and our paper will be in there. I can't say when that is, but I'm excited about it. We're also developing a camera, a specialized digital form of Kirlian photography to look for phantom limb energy. You know, veterans and others who lose a finger or a leg or an arm often have sensations of pain that go on as if the limb were there. And it's very hard to treat phantom limb pain. And there's an idea that maybe the energy of the limb is different, the phantom limb energy from that stump. So we're going to be taking a look at that in veterans and others with a new camera that Harry Jabs built, which is just, he's finishing up. So it's a very form of specialized high voltage electrophotography in which all the parameters can be varied. And that's different from the commercial devices where they have fixed parameters pretty much and you apply them accordingly. So this is a research camera to take a look at many variables and how we might envision the human energy field in the case of phantom limb.
Whose research now are you interested in?
Well, right now I've been reading a lot about the ether. And there's, I can't say that any one individual is looking at this, because I'm actually looking at a lot of old papers, because the ether was a concept thrown out of science long ago, with Einstein's relativity theory, etc. And I think it's an unfortunate state of affairs at 20th century science throughout the concept of the ether, because many things become simplified and easier to think about if there's a fundamental substance or substrate throughout the universe, inside of us, outside of us, etc., and that this is the carrier of light. It makes much sense, because you have to ask yourself, what is it that's waving when we talk about light waves? There's nothing there in an empty space. So what really is waving? It's really paradoxical. And the laws of physics, Maxwell's laws, etc., were set up for science with an ether. And the ether was thrown out. So I'm excited about the concept of an ether and its various vibrational states and how that might relate to life energy and also new energy sources that we might harness to run this planet.
Well, Dr. Rubik, thank you so much for joining us. If you would like to learn more about Dr. Rubik, you can check out www.frontiersciences.org, and sciences has an S at the end of it, or you can go to her personal site, brubik.com. Thank you again, Dr. Rubik, for coming on the show.
You're welcome. Thank you, Jonathan. It's been a pleasure.